Great. Yes. Hi, my name is Derek Gunderson, and just want to welcome everyone on behalf of the Northwestern Center on Law, Business, and Economics. And as director of our workforce science project, Deborah Weiss will take things from here. Deborah?
Thanks, Derek. We're delighted to see all of you here, and wow, it is a big group. Thrilled to see that. Please put any questions you have in the chat, and Richard and team will get to them afterwards. And again, please feel free to network by putting your LinkedIn info in and connecting with each other. So I suspect that our moderator, Richard Rosenow, needs no introduction to those who are unfamiliar with him. He's the VP of People Analytics Strategy at OneModel. He has been providing an amazing service to the people analytics community. Over the last year or so, he and OneModel have been putting together listings of people analytics jobs that are just a resource like no other. I put the link in the chat, and I encourage you all to check it out. The webinars themselves are an opportunity for a deeper dive for Richard and our guests getting into how organizations shape the roles and responsibilities of people analytics in adjacent fields. Fabulous panel today to discuss it. I'll turn it over to Richard and let him introduce our guests.
Thank you so much, Deborah. First up, welcome everybody. I mean, this is the beauty of a remote networking session. We can all get together from across the country, across the world. Love seeing everybody drop their names in the chat, and thank you all for being here today. I am as delighted as everybody on the call to be here today to ask questions and get a chance to talk to Ross and Rupert. Truly, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a couple of years, both of you, but I'm thrilled to kind of do a bit of a deep dive today. We're going to learn about workforce planning. We're going to learn about careers. We're going to learn about Walmart. I'm thrilled. So let's dive right in. We've got so much to tackle today, and it feels like so very little time to do it. Speaking of time, we'll spend about 45 minutes on Q&A. From Richard, then we'll drop. We'll go 15 minutes for Q&A at the end for everybody else. So definitely put your questions in there. But please, I'd love to have Ross and Rupert introduce themselves, and we'll be off from there. Ross, could you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So Ross Sparkman, I've been sort of in this kind of workforce planning, strategic workforce planning, workforce strategy, people analytics space for, I think, 15 plus years now. And I actually got my start in the U.S. military. I was in the Navy doing kind of manpower planning, we called it there. And it was really kind of, operational, tactical. But I was at the same time working on my MBA and starting to think about how I wanted to transition to the private sector. And, in this work, I started to kind of connect some dots around some gaps. And I ultimately ended up going into Deloitte after I got out of the Navy, spending a couple of years there doing consulting. And that was great because it gave me the opportunity to really see how like a large Big Four consulting firm thought about strategic workforce planning, people analytics, workforce analytics. So got a really great amount of exposure there, had a great opportunity to work with a bunch of great clients. From there, I actually got hired on to lead my kind of first workforce planning function at a big oil and gas provider. And it was just another great, amazing learning experience. Had the opportunity to implement my first kind of workforce planning software, which was Vimo. Peter Lauch was the CEO of Vimo. And he actually connected me through that engagement with James Gallman, who was the leader of strategic workforce planning at GE, who at the time, and still, I think if we think about some of the organizations that do really good strategic workforce planning, they were really leading the space here. And I had the opportunity to kind of come in and lead that work for GE Aviation. And that just really, really, I think, accelerated my learning curve in terms of thinking about how we do strategic workforce planning, in a big, large matrix organization like GE with just a lot of talent. And then from there, I got a call from Facebook. It was Facebook at the time, now Meta. And this is back in the mid 2000 teens where, Facebook was the place to be. And so you have to jump at the opportunity to take that. And it was really, again, just an amazing opportunity, a lot of great, really smart folks, and, tackling some really interesting, challenging topics. So spent some time there. That I had the opportunity to go and kind of do more of a technology implementation at LinkedIn, more around kind of some of the tactical elements that I'll talk about a little bit here around position management and some of the foundational pieces you have to have in place to do good workforce planning. From there, I went to Nike. and had the opportunity to do, again, strategic workforce planning, and again, tackle some really big, large issues, challenges, leading a pretty big, robust team there with a lot of leadership support. And now most recently here, I'm here at Walmart, joining my good friend Rupert, as we try to tackle some of those big challenges and opportunities at Walmart. So it's been a great journey so far.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Ross. And hey, I won't let you be humble. Ross has also written a book about workforce planning. It's a spectacular read. Make sure to take a look. I'll see if I can find it. I'll drop it in the chat there too. But thank you for everything you've done for the space, and just as great to have you on.
I'm right. It's a good call out, Richard. I'm actually right in the process of writing a second version. So there's going to be some really neat new topics that are a little bit more contemporary. And the more I am thinking about the second version, the more I'm just like rewriting the whole thing. So lots more to come there, and there's going to be some neat stuff in the next version.
That's awesome. We'll get the version of this one, and then you can binge watch the second one as soon as it comes out in the next couple months. Awesome. Thank you, Ross. And just, again, thrilled that you're here. Rupert, I'll throw things over your way.
Nice. Well, that's a tough act to follow. Do my best. Long time listener, first time caller, Richard. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to do a little different intro. I'm going to start by really talking about who's influenced me, who I've really been sort of standing on the shoulders on. I would say even longer than Ross has, going back to the 90s. So, and this I think will tell everybody a bit about where I'm coming from a workforce planning perspective. So Jack Fitzens, for me, kind of really sets the foundation. He published his first book in 1970. So a lot of our colleagues are like, workforce planning just happened the last couple of years, not so. Peter Capelli at Wharton is very, very strong on kind of how do we connect into the finance side of things. Also, really the broader talent ecosystem. I mean, he's been an inspiration. And then Mary Young at Conference Board published really what I still talk about to my class at the University of Washington as the key book on going from operational to workforce planning. So for me, that piece of work has really led me to where I am today. And then I couldn't really go off that topic without thinking about John Boudreau. He's very hot now on Work Without Jobs. But before that, all his work on pivotal roles. So you can see I've really come into this space from an analytics component. I graduated from Wharton, so I always have a finance and business perspective. And so I'm thinking about, quantitative workforce planning in the short and the long term. And then most recently, I mean, I don't want to take anything away from Richard's podcast, but David Green, really amazing leader for us in this space the last few years, bringing all of his knowledge and the connections to what's going on within workforce planning. And then my friend Stacey Harris on the systems side. So that's really gives you a bit of a picture for who's influencing me. But, I think a lot of times we think about, what we did personally. But for me, none of what I could have done would have been possible without the leaderships that I worked with. And so, I want to take this opportunity, Richard, just to acknowledge Mark Kaufman at Chase and Ann Bodner at Willis Towers Watson and Lisa Gordino at Avaya. These are HR leaders that really kind of helped me bring analytics into the space of HR when I think, we weren't really as mainstream as we are today. So that tells you a bit about where I came from. And then the last few years, I've been at Microsoft with Scott Pataski, Chris Fernandez still there, at Expedia, Dave Sutherland, and then Marilyn Miller at Anaplan. So that's really the lens that I come at for workforce planning. It's a lot about the data. We've all got to get in the data, but we can't be successful if we're not really connecting with our people leaders and the many, many challenges that people leaders and people partners have to really steer an organization's workforce. And I know we'll talk about this later, Richard, but that I think is what's driving the opportunity for workforce planning and people analytics is to help those leaders get a handle on what's happening, what's going in the future, and really provide better opportunities for associates and employees in the company, and then the people that are really keen to join your organization from the outside. So thanks for the opportunity to come and talk with everybody.
I gotta give a little plug to Rupert. I gotta give a little plug to Rupert too. Okay, so when I joined Walmart, I'd seen obviously Rupert around. We were kind of tangentially connected on LinkedIn, and I started interacting with Rupert in my first month. And I'm like, man, this guy knows everything. Like, who is this guy? And I hadn't really prepped it on his LinkedIn profile, and I looked back to exactly what he has been in this space. I think the longest of anybody I've ever met in kind of workforce planning, strategic workforce planning. And so that's why Rupert knows so much. He's just been phenomenal. He really knows a lot of stuff. So just got to give you a shout out there, Rupert.
Thanks, Ross. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. Rupert, I love that introduction too. And that's one to anybody listening, like go back, look at the recording, write down every name that he said. I tried to keep up in the chat where I could to drop some links in there. But truly a who's who in a background in a introductory course on workforce planning, if you just track down those people. But oh my goodness, thank you both for being on. And so let's dive in a little bit. One thing I've learned talking about people analytics and workforce planning is that if you don't define it up front, everybody has their own definition. And we're not in a place where there's like, there's not FINRA here. There's not somebody saying like, this is exactly what it is. That's the definition legally. There's a lot of this like decentralized movements that's makes us really powerful, but that definition gets lost sometimes. So I'd love to hear from each of you, really, what's your definition of workforce planning? And I know that's a lot. That's a big question to ask, especially someone who's been in the space for a long time. But if you have some thoughts you could share with the group here, I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so I can go, or you can go.
You
okay. So and I'll ask you, Richard, do you want the short answer, or do you want I'll give you the meat of how I'm thinking about this?
Let's do short with like a hint of meat. We'll do appetizer.
Okay. So I think if I was to really, really succinctly define like workforce planning, I would say workforce planning really is about taking kind of the annual plan from a budget perspective, translating that into a hiring plan that you sort of track against on a month-by-month basis to ensure that you're managing your costs effectively over the short term, ensuring you have the right hiring in place, and ensure that you're just, meeting an ongoing cadence to track against that plan. If we're talking about strategic workforce planning, I'd say it's similar, but it's a longer term in nature. So you're talking about a 2 to 5 year horizon, and it's more aligned to sort of your LRP, your long range plan. You really want your strategic workforce plan to be a function of what you're planning at the corporate level and thinking through different scenarios. Now, those are just two component parts of what I think about when I think about workforce strategy, workforce planning, or a strategic workforce planning. There's really kind of 4 component parts that I think almost make up a flywheel that I don't think a lot of organizations understand how they connect in terms of the dots and the importance of each aspect of this flywheel. I think that it really does start with the operational AOP process, where finance and leaders are agreeing, kind of holding hands on what the budget is for the next year. And then workforce planning, HR, and finance come together and turn that plan, which is a dollar budget amount, into headcount requirements by leaders. So that's where, in my mind, it really all starts, right? Like this is how much money we have to work with, how many people are we going to hire or not hire based on that plan. From there, and this is a part that I don't think a lot of organizations get right, we need to be able to manage how we think about the requisitions required for hiring, the positions, the systems that we use to capture those hiring requirements, the governance, and the process around approving and activating any of those hiring that have been approved. So sometimes there's not necessarily clear a line between the budget and how we capture the outputs of those hiring requirements in a system. Okay, that's actually a really important part as we go to the next element of the flywheel, which is that operational workforce plan. So now we define the budget, the hiring requirements. We have them captured in a good system with the right governance and processes around managing those headcounts. Now we want to track our progress to that plan on a month-over-month basis, right? And so we start to think about things like how has the business changed, month over month? Are there areas where we need to flex or change our approach over the short term? How is attrition tracking? Are we planning for that attrition from a hiring perspective? How are we thinking about hiring in general relative to what we planned? Do we have the right recruiting resources in place? How long is it taking to hire different roles? how are we tracking from a wage perspective? Are we on track to what we planned for from a finance perspective? These things could actually hit our bottom line and impact our shareholder value. So it's really important to be able to do this. And usually this is when I think about workforce planning, but a lot of people think about workforce planning more commonly. Then we move into the fun part and the truly strategic part, which is where we pare down this long-range plan from an organizational perspective with our strategic workforce plan or workforce strategy. Okay, so we have the 1 year view, which would make up the first year of our longer range plan, which is a 1 to 5 year, which is the first year being the operational plan. Now we're thinking, what about 2 to 5 years? Okay, now we're starting to think about more of the strategic things that we need to align our workforce strategy with. Okay, so if we have X initiative happening, how are we forecasting supply and demand against those initiatives? I love this terminology that Rupert always uses. What's the buy, build, bought, borrow strategy, right? How are we thinking about the right location mix to be able
it's
to
not my terminology.
Not yours, but you use a lot.
Shamelessly steal it, but yes, I think it's a good framework.
It's a great one. It's a great framework, and we're running all these scenarios against these different aspects. We think about our diversity mix longer term. What are the skill requirements that we're going to need longer term? How do we think about gearing ratios, productivity and efficiency gains when we start to think about new technology, the cost of the workforce? All of these things should be pared down with our broader corporate strategy, right? Our long-range plan. And again, I think that this is an area where a lot of organizations just don't get it right. They focus on 1 or 2 elements, usually the AOP and that kind of operational workforce planning. If you're able to nail all 4 of these elements and understand how they connect, and build up processes, systems, tools, technology, and have the right people and the right leadership support that understand all this, like you're really going to be able to drive a workforce that's aligned to your strategy. That's the long-winded answer. I probably took up too much time.
No, it's perfect, Ross. And I really like it because if you're in recruiting, you can say, we hire people. And I think with workforce planning, it is vast. And I think that's something that gets missed a lot. Is it's a vast system of interconnected pieces and tools and teams,
exactly,
all of that. And so I really appreciate the longer version of that, because this isn't a vertical that's similar to some of the other HR verticals. It's an interconnected system in a lot of ways. So
and by the way, there's workforce management also, which is sometimes called workforce planning, just to make people more confused, right?
Yeah.
So
it's tremendous, Ross. Thank you. And Rupert, I want to throw it your way too.
Yeah, I'd like to build on a couple of things from Ross. So, I totally agree that, workforce planning starts with finance and the business. You have to really be able to connect your day-to-day recruiting and people plans with what's affordable, whether you're in a for-profit business or non-profit organization. That's one of the things that really attracted me to Walmart, because we do have a very strong connection and partnership with finance, and our people partners, that's our name for the HR business partner role, they work very closely with finance during the AOP process. So for me, that is absolutely foundational. If you don't have that, the challenge is you can do all these amazing long-term workforce plans, but you don't have a real great place to anchor them in when it comes to action. But then I do agree with Ross that, you got 2 additional components that are uniquely workforce planning. One of them is, what's the future implications of the existing organization? So, and this is an area where, to one of your questions later, Richard, what's changed that's caused workforce planning to be so hot right now is we have a lot more capabilities at our fingertips to do machine learning on the last 2-3 years of history, project that forward in a really systematic way. No forecast is ever perfect, but it's a lot more systematic than what we all used to try and do in Excel or other spreadsheets. So forecasting that, a systematic methodology that the analytics and the planning team can work on together, and then you put that in the hands of your people partners and your talent acquisition partners, you've really, transform the way that they have conversations with their leaders. And that's the third piece I want to emphasize from what Ross said, is scenario planning. Because you can look at the whole organization in this very quantitative way, but when you really want to go deep and say, how are we going to change this over time so that we don't have span of control that's out of line with target anymore, or so that we don't have a pyramid that's middle heavy and we're really investing in emerging talent and non-traditional sources, these are problem, or we want to create a skills-based organization, which is one of our big focus areas. These are things that simply don't happen within the time frame of the AOP. And you need to have that forward-looking capability, 2 to 5 years at least. I've worked with some companies in previous roles that can go out 7 to 10 years in a place like a auto manufacturing or a natural resources company. And you need to be able to say over time, I don't know exactly what's going to happen to this person, but I know that there's going to be this number of people leaving, and I need to have a plan to replace that capability in the organization. And I'm either going to do it by hiring in the open market, or I'm going to create some more creative plans to invest in development in the short term that gives me that capability in the medium and long term. And just as Ross says, that's really the magic of workforce planning. And that's the thing that I see chief people officers and CFOs get excited about, because they're really going beyond being reactive and sort of budget constrained, and they're creating a new future for their organization. And that's what workforce planning is all about.
I love that. And Rupert, I just want to really highlight something you said there, which was the strong partnership with finance and people partners that also work with finance. Like, if that's not top of the job description, be like, come work here. We have solved a core part of this whole puzzle. That's an incredible attraction for people that have worked in this space, that have worked with finance teams and workforce planning teams. The fact that you have that foundation to build on is just incredible. So just wanted to highlight that. Everything else you said is tremendous too, but wanted to give you a shout out for that in particular.
Thank you.
But so Walmart's a big place. I did some research, and 2.1 million associates globally, 1.6 million in the US, and that puts it above both Latvia and Estonia in terms of populations. It's an incredible amount of people to try to do workforce planning around and for and with and different segments there. But just as you've been joining Walmart, because both of you have joined in the past 6 months, if I recall correctly, could you share a little bit about what it's been like onboarding? Because with such a big organization like that, that's the Fortune 1, what's that experience been like?
Let me go a little first on this one, if that's okay, Ross.
Yeah, please.
So I joined Walmart just over 6 months ago. And I got to say, like, it's really a people-first culture. It's a company that's been in existence, over 70 years. It comes from really a business model that's like rooted in kind of the American heartland, the American culture. And one of the first things that Jocelyn did in my onboarding is advise me to read Sam Walton's biography. And you really, even when you read through that, you can see how passionate the company is about the associate and the stake that we all have in the success of the company and in driving better value for our customers and helping them to live better through that. And I really have felt like that's not just a sort of a slogan and a PowerPoint. I mean, that's something that you really hear in the conversations that you have through the company. And it's amazing, even in that biography, which, as you can imagine, is very retail driven. There's several pieces we're using today around spans and layers and organizational effectiveness and the importance of managing the overhead population and keeping that low as you'll continue to expand. So there's a lot of workforce planning truths built into the culture of the company, and I've loved that. The other part of it is, and you may have seen this at CES this year, like, we're really tech powered as a company, and that's like really infused throughout the people organization. We have a great partnership with product. We have a great set of analytics coming out, mostly through Power BI and a strong data warehouse. And like, for me as a planning leader, like, that's a foundational piece that's been exciting to get to. The only challenge is there's so much of it going on, it can take you a long time to just figure out like where everything is. I mean, just like all big companies, there's a lot of good work being done. And so, that's been our focus for these last few months, is just to kind of channel that in those workforce planning areas that we talked about earlier. What would you say, Ross?
Yeah, so I would certainly echo everything that you just said, Rupert. I think a couple of things that I would reemphasize too. First, the culture piece was a surprise for me. a little bit in that it's just, they have a really strong culture at Walmart. And I think to Rupert's point that it's kind of based on the location of kind of Arkansas and, the founders, people are just really friendly here at Walmart. And I don't know, maybe it's just Walmart, maybe it's Arkansas, whatever, but I was just really friendly.
It's you, Ross. They're just so friendly to you.
Is that just me? Okay. Well, I had this little side story on that though, Rupert and Richard. One of the sort of cultural rules that Sam implemented was anytime you walk by somebody, you have to smile and kind of say hi within 10 feet. I didn't know that at first, right? And I didn't learn it till about 3 weeks later. So to your point, so is it, man, do I know these people? Like, where do I know these people? Like every single person that was walking by me was like smiling and like, hi. And so I was kind of like, wow, these are just the friendliest people. Or I was kind of like, I must know that person. So there really is this sort of culture of just being really warm, open, and friendly. Probably more so than any organization I've ever been a part of. I'd say just awesome. It's really neat. The other piece that I would kind of highlight that kind of dovetails off of Rupert's comments is I was a little bit surprised how willing Walmart is to kind of go after some of the more kind of contemporary ideas out there in this kind of like talent, technology space. Like we're really a big advocate of like, let's figure out how we can leverage AI and ChatGPT and generative AI to make our lives more productive and, better. I don't know what the right terminology is, work-life balance, you could say. And thinking about things like the skills-based, workforce planning and some of these just really big topics, there's just a lot of openness to go after and tackle them, much more so than other organizations that I've been a part of. And so it really is an exciting place to work in this space because there's so many cool projects to the point where it's like, man, I don't really have time, but I kind of want to get involved in this because it's just so interesting. And we're just so open to just trying to tackle these big, meaty sort of challenges.
That's fantastic. Yeah, just thank you. And the chat's lighting up, so I'm trying to catch as many things as I can there, but people are loving what you're saying so far. So just appreciate both of you sharing so much. And for anyone that has other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. I'm collecting them all for the end. We'll make sure we circle back. But here's a question that actually I had, but Ken popped up in the chat there too. Could you share a little bit about the team structure at Walmart? It'd be great to hear kind of like what does workforce planning look like and how does that team look overall? But then as a build on, because I know we've got a lot of people in the people analytics space, how does workforce planning interact with that people analytics team? And maybe we could kind of divide and conquer here. Maybe Ross, if you could take the workforce planning structure, and then Rupert, let's throw you the kind of people analytics side. It'd be great to hear from you guys about that.
So I'd say that if you think about how the team is structured, we definitely run a lean team compared to other organizations, especially for the size, which is why we're really working on building scalable solutions with our technology and working to empower the people partners, the talent partners, the finance partners to be able to do this work without sort of a bespoke sort of people partner or workforce planning partner to help them with the work. But in terms of how we're structuring, we really think about it in terms of 3 pillars. We have our mergers and acquisitions team that sits under Jocelyn. We have an org design team that really is kind of focused on building out scalable solutions and playbooks and best practices in how we do org design such that our people partners are able to deliver to their clients. And then we have our team, which is the workforce strategy and planning team, where we focus on breaking out the organization into, I guess we call it key pillars as well. I would support our tech function, our corporate function, and our technology, our international function, and having a couple partners that sit under me to work with those people partners and leaders. And then Rupert would have a similar look on his team where he would have a workforce planning strategy partner supporting Sam's Club and Walmart US is basically how we've kind of structured. Anything else you would kind of add to that, Rupert?
I think captured it well, and I'll talk a little about analytics partnership in a minute. In addition to the Walmart US and Sam's focus that my new hires have, we also tackle the intersection with our Skills Plus initiative. So we have a couple of people on the team that are really focused on that. And then how do we really bring that data together so that we can understand what are the roles that we've deemed sort of most important for us to focus on? We call them targeted roles. How can we plan those roles out over time and understand the external data? So that's one of our big partnerships with the talent intelligence team in talent operations. And then how do we build models based on our knowledge of the workforce as it is today and from the last few years that allow us to project where we're going in the future? And we're really fortunate to have a super strong partnership in people analytics. They're part of our total rewards function, and they deliver really a huge suite of dashboards out through Power BI. We'll use those a lot to focus on attrition, headcount. There's also a strong partnership with finance and the spans and layers and organizational effectiveness component. And then we have another set of partners on talent analytics, and that was actually very similar to the structure that I experienced when I was at Microsoft, where they can specialize more in where are our openings, how fast are we filling those, what are some of the unique aspects of the candidate flow. And so I would say candidly, we're still in the process of like bringing all of those threads together for a planning view. And so get something that's really valuable for our talent and people partners.
That's super helpful. And could you say a little bit more about the org design team? That's a bit of a rare one to see within a people, despite how important it might be and despite how important it is to HR teams in general. We'd just love to hear a little bit more about them too.
Just quickly the way, so this team before was actually more focused on, before Jocelyn came in, who's our Rupert and I's leader. This team was actually more focused on kind of org design. You can imagine, again, an organization the size and scale of Walmart, where there's all sorts of things happening, whether it's through M&As, restructuring. There will need to be some dedicated resources to that. I think as we've started to kind of continue to evolve the way we think about just workforce planning, we've got new leaders and new capabilities. The shift has focused to enabling those people partners to be able to do that work themselves, rather than providing that, sort of one-on-one service, bespoke service to them. And so that org design team now is more focused on being able to provide scalable solutions to arm those people partners in their ability to do org design. Because the reality is it is the HR business partners, the people partners who know their organizations better. And, to the extent that we can just give them the tools to do that more effectively through best practices will be probably more valuable than having us come in when we don't necessarily know the nuances of the organizations that are going through design, etc. Is I think what the rationale is behind that team. Any other thoughts on that, Rupert?
I mean, there's just a great overlap, Richard, between trying to make the organization more efficient from a kind of numbers perspective. So again, think about spans of control, layers, kind of overlapping functions and how roles are defined. So those are all things that are part of our charter when it comes to measurement and forecasting and scenario planning. But it's no good doing all that forecasting and scenario planning if you don't have anybody to actually advise on, well, how do I bring these organizations together and reduce the number of managers that are needed? And as Ross described, in the past, like that work of organizational design consulting was more our focus. And in this year, we've started to pivot more towards how can we build that common platform framework for quantitative workforce planning while still maintaining kind of all that knowledge that we built up under previous leaders.
That's incredibly helpful. And I think what caught my ear a little bit, not to open a can of worms on it, but just historically, workforce planning was a thing, and then people analytics kind of came about, and people analytics kind of became the thing, and then workforce planning kind of fell under people analytics in some places. I think what I really appreciate about what you guys are doing is workforce planning is a standalone unit at Walmart, in the sense as standalone as workforce planning can be, but like you've got your friends and family within your org as a whole. And it's an interesting set, and a lightly different set than we typically see on people analytics kind of org structures.
Well, I like to say that you can do people analytics and never do any planning. Like that's one of the downsides. There's so much data now. You can spend all your time thinking about, well, where are we today and what happened in the past? And that's still very valuable, right? And that's still where a lot of leaders are. but you can't do any planning if you don't have the analytics. You can have the conversations and you can like get together in a room and everyone can have a great discussion. But if you can't like tie it back to like, well, what is my workforce today? How am I going to measure where it is in the future? And how do I track progress towards that? That's planning. And the people analytics is the foundation.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful.
And I would just add to your point, Richard, around having those two functions segmented, where in the past I've usually been part of a people analytics function as well. It is nice in the workforce planning, workforce strategy space to be able to Rupert's point, actually focus on that rather than doing data munging. And there's a really clear distinction at Walmart between roles and responsibilities, and there's an expectation that team will help support us as they would other stakeholders. And so we don't have to do as much of that ourselves, which frees up a lot of our capacity to focus on the things that we should be focused on. Whereas in the past, I think the lines can get blurry sometimes in some of the other roles that I've been in.
That's super helpful. So just for sake of time, let's make sure we talk about your teams. It would be great to hear open roles, what's happening for the investment, what kind of caused some of the investment that's happened on those open roles. I don't know who would like to kind of take first, because I saw you had 3 roles recently, but I know there's been some in the past, some have been filled, some are still coming up in the future. However you'd like to take this, but just want to make sure we give you a platform to talk about the hiring that's going on at Walmart right now.
Maybe let me talk, Ross, at the beginning about the roles that I recently filled, because I think I'll then turn it over to you to talk about your vision for sort of the tech and international space. So as Ross described, the way we think about our roles is Ross and I really co-leading the workforce planning COE, and then within the COE, we split up the segments and functions between us. So I take on Walmart US and Sam's in more detail. Ross takes on international, the corporate functions, and the tech team. And so I had the fortune the last few months to hire 2 senior managers, one internal, one external. They're focusing on really bringing our aspirations for cross-functional workforce planning to our Walmart and Sam's partners. They're working really closely with chiefs of staff and people partners in those functions. So they're not, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. They're coming in and really partnering with those teams. And then part of their role is to understand, well, what are the priorities for those businesses from a people perspective, and where can we bring in our capabilities for skills-based planning, organizational effectiveness with spans and layers, external talent market data. I heard recently a great value add from one of my partners I'm going to steal, which is like, tell us something we don't already know. Don't be like a consultant that like steals your watch and tells you what time it is. Like, come in and give us more information. And so that and Missy and Cassidy are doing a great job on that. And Ross, let me turn it over to you and talk about your vision for the team.
And honestly, Rupert just did a beautiful job describing those 2 roles and how they interact with the business. The roles that I will be looking for in the coming months will be very similar in nature, but they will be focused specifically on tech, and then the other one will be focused on international corporate functions, but really with a very similar remit that Rupert just described. So working on starting to think through the timing of that, and how we want to prioritize and get a pipeline. But that's really, in terms of the next few months, the type of roles that I would be expecting to hire.
And I have one other role to make a plug for. It won't report to me directly, but to one of my key partners in our operations space. And that person is going to come in and help us build out forecasting for both hiring and attrition, and bring in external talent market data to support that. So we've had a couple of runs at this, but now I think we have one that we have a definition that will really be super valuable for our talent acquisition team and fill a lot of manual work that's being done across the teams at the moment. And I'll just say, I think we may come to this later, Richard, but I'm very excited to build my network with the people that are on the call today. So I would just advise you, while we're getting these roles posted, just to connect with me on LinkedIn. And just when you do connect with me, just drop me a line that says, you heard me on this podcast, because we are pretty rigorous about not just letting anybody join our networks. for I am anyway. I won't speak for Ross, but so
that's super helpful. You took the words out of my mouth in terms of where can people go to learn more, talk to you about this. Ross, anything you'd like to add there?
No, same thing. Connect and mention the podcast. Definitely right now in the process of building out a pipeline of people that could be potential good fits for the roles. So to the extent that I can start getting visibility and connect with folks that might be interested, I would be super open to that.
I think one thing I'd like to take the opportunity to do, Richard, is just make sure we're clear on scope. So we talked at the beginning about workforce planning, and it's a very broad topic. And actually, Walmart has very robust workforce planning capabilities in the field that are really focused on rostering and scheduling in the relative near term. I mean, there is some strategy there as well, but they're focused. They were in the operations teams, and they're delivering, the schedules for a store based on what the demand is going to be in the next day or the next week. So that's not within the scope for Ross and I. We focus on the overhead population, which is only 75,000 people in the scope of Walmart. And some of those roles I saw you posted are in that team as well. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk with you more about it. Those were a little bit more on the capacity planning side of workforce planning.
That's helpful and a great distinction. And I've been sending them to host and panelists the entire time. So I apologize, everybody. My links are not flying through. So I just put Rupert and Ross's LinkedIn to everyone, not just to the hosts and panelists. But hey, I want to make sure we get to kind of the group Q&A. But let me pick one more question here for you because we're running a little low on time. But it'd be great to hear what's been going on in workforce planning. Let's end on this one, kind of like a broad thought leadership. Both of you have been so touched in and tapped into this for a very long time. And like you said, like it's kind of had its ebbs and waves and ups and downs. And it feels like we're on this strong rise right now. It feels like something's happening in workforce planning, at least to me, that we're seeing a little bit more attention, a little bit more thoughtfulness in this space. It'd be great to hear from you both on like what's driving that in this moment today. And is this different than the past kind of rise and fall and rise and fall? And Ross, why don't I throw it to you for the first here?
I have a couple thoughts. And so first, I think Rupert definitely touched on one of them, just with, how we're just starting to see these massive advances in, whether it's Gen AI or just technology in general, and our ability to forecast our ability to better be able to manage our data. It's just making some of the work that we do a little bit easier. And so that's one thing. But the two things that really strike me as being maybe events that have happened or are happening that have, I think, brought a little bit more focus in this space are some of the stuff that's been happening with the tech pullback over the last couple of years. And in my mind, I can't help but think that a lot of that was a function of not great workforce planning, right? We were growing and growing and growing and growing in these tech spaces without really thinking about the implications of what the size of that workforce could be in a downturn, the cost, the impact. So there wasn't a lot of connectedness from a workforce planning perspective for a lot of organizations. And now that I think a lot of leaders, very senior leaders in the realm of CEOs, very famous CEOs, are starting to see that as well, and starting to realize that there has to be a more measured approach to the way that you grow and align with your strategies. Not just to let me get the biggest organization because it looks like I just have a huge, massive organization, but there's actual consequences in terms of shareholder value. So I think that's definitely put a renewed emphasis on kind of strategic workforce planning and workforce strategy. I think additionally, the reality is with Gen AI, there is a lot of discussion around how this technology will impact productivity and the capacity, and how do we structure, right size our different teams with this knowledge that there's going to be, some opportunities. I like to call them opportunities because I think that it is ultimately going to create a lot more opportunities for everybody to do more value add work. But what does that mean though in the short terms in terms of how we structure our teams? And again, specifically in the tech world, I think that there's a lot of organizations that have invested really heavily in technology over the last 3 or 4 years, whether it's through technology to actually create Gen AI solutions or other initiatives that now are in a world where they have to start to see a return on their investment and have to justify the level of investment over the last 3 or 4 years. And so to do so requires us to think into the future and factor in these productivities and how we will work side by side with, Gen AI and this technology, which is pure square right in the center of workforce strategy and strategic workforce planning. So those are the two things from my perspective that are giving this a little bit more visibility over the last couple of years.
I just want to add one thing, Richard, if I can, which is I think the people function itself is becoming much more strategic. And I think that's been something I've observed the last 10 years, not specific for generative AI, but just there's a higher bar for people leaders, for chief people officers. And I got to tell you, like, they're meeting their bar, they're coming up with great ideas and great ways to think about the workforce differently. And that's creating a space for leaders like Ross and I and our teams to really do work that we didn't think was possible before. And so, that's why I sort of started by acknowledging some of those leaders that I've worked with, because they may not, either want to or know how to get into the data side of things, but they know how to apply those capabilities to the decisions and how to influence really senior leaders and board members. And that, I think, is, a really big change compared to where things were when data was not as available, HR wasn't viewed as favorably. And I think we're really stepping up to that as a function. I'm excited.
That's helpful to hear. And that's there's a lot of dire news about HR, and I think it is missed how strong the HR function has become. So I always love to hear that. Anytime you can shout out to the HR function as a whole and put some good press out there, we need to capture it and run with it. So thank you for saying that, Rupert. Well, usually we close for Q&A, but we've got some really good questions that came in through the chat that I'd love to keep on the recording. So I think we'll actually keep running through to the end of the hour, if that's okay with everybody. The first question that came through was from Daniel McDonald. He said, what do we see as the challenges to getting senior executives to buy into the value prop of strategic workforce planning? And I know this is going to cause some like scabs and old war wounds to come off as we talk to Ross and Rupert here, but it'd be great to hear from you, like, in past histories, different places you've been, what are some challenges you've seen and what are some things you could do to overcome?
There's definitely, and you kind of highlighted it earlier, I think both of you did, around as a starting point, the relationship and the partnership between finance and HR. Because again, we talked about really a lot of this stuff starts with that AOP. And so to the extent that, your top senior leaders, and I'm talking about a CFO and a CHRO, are holding hands and aligning on the importance of this is really a big factor. I think the other piece is your ability to show the business case quantitatively for the impacts or the risks or the opportunities that those different types of scenarios that Rupert played out can have. And if you're able to do that in a succinct way with a good story that ties back to your financials and your talent, I think that you're going to get those CFOs and those CHROs to hold hands, and then in turn get your CEOs to buy in. And then I think from there you start to see more of a snowball effect in terms of gaining momentum.
I would also add, you've got to meet the leaders where they are. So if they, like some of the best and most impactful longest term planning and forecasting projects I've done are ones where a leader has come and said, I just can't figure out like why we should continue with investing so much money in university recruiting. Like, are they really better hires than the rest? And then that led us down a whole quality of hire evaluation that's still used today, like 15 years later, right? And kind of now automated, I'm sure improved, but it comes from those questions of why am I spending this much money? Like, help me quantify that. Or the same thing with when we were really confronting the question of equitable hiring, like help me think about where is the talent in the US and are we really able to access that talent in an equitable way? How should that be different for us as we think about the organization? And then in our current situation about cost management and like, let's make sure we're really making decisions in the long term that bring the capabilities that we need and they don't expand the overhead costs for the company. So you have to hear those questions and then be able to come and say, I can't answer all of them, but I'll get started. And these are the things I'll do with the data and the platform that I have available.
That's incredibly helpful from both of you. And one of the things I'm kind of hearing from you both too is like workforce planning, a lot of the pitch we make is around risks. And one of the tough things with risks, though, and this gets to the next question from Laura Anderson, is it's difficult to show the ROI of something that doesn't happen. And a lot of times, really good workforce planning causes bad things not to happen. And so it's a little tough then sometimes to claim credit there or to build that ROI case when you say, hey, the ROI of doing workforce planning is avoiding tragedy. It's like, and you'll never see it. You'll never actually see it come up because we did it well. So
we
could you
talked
talk
about
a little
this.
bit about, please.
I want to dive in on this and then I'll pass to Ross,
Yeah.
but we talked about it a little earlier. So there's two areas that I think are very valuable. One of them is, and I think you've seen this in a lot of places, and Dawn Klinghoffer at Microsoft talks about it quite a lot with David Green, is there's a lot of planning going on already. Like there's a lot of spreadsheets, there's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of meetings that are happening, and all of that has a cost for the organization. There are a lot of fragmented uses of different tools. So you bring those together and that's your sort of underutilized investment. And then you can say, we're going to have a more systematic return. We're going to cut that cost and have much better utilization and save time for the business, the people partners, the HR business partners. Like that's an ROI that's very tangible. The second thing I would say is that's the beauty of scenario planning is you're taking your leaders out to the future. So when I was at Anaplan, we made the case for emerging talent hiring, university hiring, and we were able to show in the model that if we continue doing what we're doing, this is what the cost will be for the workforce because we're hiring at the middle level of the organization. If we change that structure and we, instead of hiring in the middle, we hire at the entry level, we'll reduce our cost per head over time, but we have to make the investment up front, you know, and having that, that's a pure strategic workforce planning view because you simply can't make that case within one fiscal year. You have to go really 3, preferably 5 to do that. And the same thing is true when you think about leadership, women in leadership, and how you change your trajectory. You can't do that over time. So scenario planning is your friend when it comes to sort of doing what you're saying, Richard, projecting out into the future and showing like what will happen if we don't change. Go ahead, Ross.
So that was really the key point I was going to make as well, Rupert. I think the only other thing that you could potentially bring into the conversation is sort of cases or use cases, benchmarking around scenarios where things haven't went well, you know, if you didn't take certain measures. And again, I use this example of the tech pullback to say, like, let's think about, you know, how we're growing and what the potential impact could be in the future if we're growing too fast, et cetera. So to the extent that you can use real world examples of things that have not went well and help leaders connect some of those dots can also be a potential way to think about some risk challenges.
And machine learning can be helpful too, because you can say, this is what the model tells us happens if everything continues the way it did in the past. Now let me say we improve our promotion rate. Now you see attrition goes down. Now you can calculate like how much you save by not having to replace those roles. So I'm a big advocate of trying to like get to that, tell that story about the future and put numbers around it. To me, that's the best you can do on ROI.
I love that.
Hope that answered your question, Laura.
Hope so too. Okay, so I've got one to end on here. And question came from Melissa. She said, if somebody wanted to break into workforce planning today, if they were in HR, if they were in people analytics, maybe somewhere else in the business, do you have a recommendation? And I'm sorry to ask that you keep it a little succinct and quick, but if you have any recommendations for somebody that wanted to break into workforce planning today.
For me, I think doing exactly what you're doing by attending these types of events and connecting with folks like Richard, myself, and Rupert. Network, get out there and meet as many people as you can. Richard Rosenow is, I would say, best in class example of somebody who knows how to network and get out and meet people. So do what Richard's done.
I mean, the other thing I would, and I would try and look in your existing roles and organization. Is there a small project you can work on the side that may not be multi-million-dollar saving, but it'll allow you to try out some of the practices that you can learn about from podcasts and presentations like this, And it'll give you that experience within your organization. And if your organization doesn't appreciate it, then Walmart is always a great place for you to come and
There you go. There you go.
There we go. Ross and Rupert, thank you so much for being on today. You have lived up to expectations, exceeded expectations. Thank you so much for sharing, being open, being part of this community, and all the things you've done for the community over the past years. And a thank you to the Northwestern Workforce Science Project for making this possible and bringing us all together. And lastly, thank you everybody for being on today. This was a tremendous group, so many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but make sure to track down Ross and Rupert on LinkedIn. Track me down on LinkedIn too, always happy to answer questions. And thank you all.
Thanks, Richard.
Great discussion.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.